Hello, welcome everyone. So glad y'all can attend. This is the Serving Those Who Served. Jay Bunte, Patton Gade. We're going to get into our introductions, but I just wanted to remind everyone throughout this process, you might come up with questions, something might pop in your mind. There's a question box that you can put in your questions, and at the very end, we're going to get to them. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments and we will get to them. All right.
So welcome everybody, and first off, thank you for coming and spending some of your time with us. What that shows me is that you are committed to our veterans and the people that served our country, and we thank you for doing that and taking time out of your busy schedule to spend a little bit of time and hopefully learn something and get some takeaways from us. My name is Patton Gade, and I'm the National Director of Military Lending at U Mortgage. And a little bit of background on me: I'm a West Point graduate, graduated in 1994, so it's been a minute. I flew helicopters for about 8 years, which is I always tell people was a great way to spend my 20s. In 2022, I was the #1 ranked VA loan originator in the country. And so VA loans are what I do. I closed, I don't know, 250 of them or something last year. So definitely something that I do a lot of. And just an interesting fact about me, I've got a dog named Meatball, and his name and his body are absolutely perfectly matched. And if you're lucky, you'll get to see him running around back behind me as we go. Jay?
All right, I've been fortunate enough to meet Meatball. He lives up to his name. Like Patton, I'm a West Point graduate, 2004. I spent 8 years active duty. I spent a little bit of time in the artillery, but I spent most of my time in the infantry. I'm not quite the #1 guy, but I'm a decent amount of VA loans. I think I was 28 or so last year. And a little tidbit about me: I live in Texas, but Montana is absolutely my favorite state in America. If you've never been, be sure to go to Glacier National Park. It is life-changing. So why are we here? Why are y'all watching this webinar? Well, for one, you want to learn how to better serve veterans, and we're doing that through home ownership. And there's a big opportunity. Realtors that are watching this, there's a huge opportunity to help serve our veterans. The largest employer in the entire United States is the US military, over 3 million employees, right? And so anyone that knows anything about the military and active duty soldiers, what do? They PCS, right? They move around. And a lot of times they need to buy homes at their new duty station. And so there's a huge opportunity to help educate and get veterans into homes. And if you do it well, veterans, as you know, Patton, they're very loyal by nature. They're very disciplined. They're very close with each other. You literally are living day in and day out, and you share life stories, and you also share good experiences with referral partners. So if you do a veteran right, they are going to sing your praises from the mountaintops and tell all their friends and other friends that are PCSing, and it becomes a very, very good referral source for you.
And here's the thing: over the course of time, I believe that not only realtors, but loan officers have really done a disservice to our veteran customer. The reality is that 33% of veterans that have a mortgage said that they had no idea that VA loans even existed. And then nearly half reported that their lender didn't ask them about VA loans, didn't talk to them at all about it, and their realtors the same way. So there's roughly 20 million veterans in the United States, and something like 15% of them have ever used their VA loan. So that tells me there's a massive, whether it's a training gap or whether it's just, I don't know exactly what it is, but the consumer themselves, the veteran, the military doesn't teach you anywhere about VA loans. I believe it's the absolute #1 benefit of having served in the military is the ability to do a VA loan. They have earned the right to use it. And so as real estate professionals, both realtors and loan officers, we must do a better job of talking to them about what their options are and just bringing it up and bringing it to the forefront. Oftentimes, you talk to a Vietnam era veteran, when they were in the military, they may have known about a VA loan, but they believe that the VA loan expired after 10 years after they leave the service, because that's what it used to be. So things have changed in the VA loan. A ton of things have changed, and that's one of them. So it's up to all of us as real estate professionals to do a better job of educating our customers.
All right. We all know there's myths out there. Let's go into, I think we're going to go into some of the top ones, about 6 of them that we see in and day out. And we want to combat these with facts and with data. All right. So let's go into number 1. You hear it all the time. Oh, they're putting no money down. That means they're a weak buyer, right? They have no money. That's why they're going 0 down. Well, here's some data around that.
Yeah,
All right, Patton.
so you got 2 borrowers here. I mean, they're relatively close as far as median FICO. The borrower B has a little bit better credit score. Median household income a little bit higher for borrower B. Average loan amount a little bit higher for borrower B. Like, which one's a stronger buyer? Relatively close, but I mean, I think B is a little bit better.
Yeah,
and
I'm going with Bravo.
Yeah, and so really, that's your average VA buyer in 2023 is about a $350,000 loan amount, about $66,000 in median household income. And the other part of this is that 18% of veterans actually put a down payment down. That's something that you may not think about, but just on the basis of a funding fee, like if you put down 5% of a down payment, your funding fee drops. Let's say it's your second time use, your funding fee would be 3.3% if you did 0 down. So, but if you put 5% down, your funding fee drops to 1.5%. That's a significant savings for the veteran, and we see that all the time with our veteran home buyers.
And just to add to that real quickly, like Patton, probably with you, a lot of my buyers, they have the capability to put money down. They have the money, but they're like, man, I actually have other uses for my cash flow. I got other vehicles, I got other investments that are making me a greater rate of return, even with a higher interest rate, even in the 6, 7, 8% interest rate that we've seen in the last few months. They have other uses for it. So don't fall into the stigma that like 0 down means they're weak.
No, I actually had a buyer just 6-8 months ago bought a house for $3.7 million. As you know, Jay, there's no limit to a VA loan. As of January 1st of 2020, there was the Blue Water Navy Act signed by President Trump that said there's no longer a max loan amount limit for VA loans. And so, like, I had this buyer that bought at $3.7 million, did 0 down. Why did he do that? Well, exactly what you said, Jay. He's actually in the business of lending money, or he's a venture capital guy. So he's out there investing in actually veteran-owned businesses primarily, and his money was better spent instead of doing a conventional loan and putting down $1 million, $1.5 million, whatever it would have been. He'd rather invest his money in other people and have it out there working for him. So again, like Jay said, 0 down does not mean you're a weak buyer at all.
No. And for the realtors that didn't catch that part that Patton just said, the VA does not have a maximum loan limit, right? Individual lenders can set a limit. They may only go up to 1 million or 2 million or 3 million or 4, whatever it is. But the VA itself does not have a max loan limit, assuming full entitlement. Okay, that's an important little tidbit.
But Jay, VA loans are so hard to underwrite, man. Like,
you're right. They're extremely difficult. I hear it all the time. All right, so let's look at this. The VA 26-7, for those that don't know, that is the lender's handbook. It's basically the Bible on guidelines of the VA loans. They put it directly in there that underwriters are encouraged to consider every possible appropriate factor in seeking approval for the veteran. They are literally telling you, underwriters, do everything you can to get the loan approved within the guidelines. It's right there.
Yeah, and so another quote from there is that, as long as lenders document their reasoning, it's extremely unlikely that the VA staff would ever take issue with their decision. And so let me give you an analogy. I've said this to people over the years, and when my son, he's 10 years old, when he was 2, he'd come up to me and he'd scribble on a piece of paper and draw this beautiful picture. If he came up to me and walked up and said, "Look, Dad, look what I drew," I'd look at it and go, I see a bunch of squiggles, like I have no idea what that's supposed to be. But if he walked up to me and he said, "Hey, look, Dad, look at this elephant I drew," I could look at those squiggles and I could go, you know what? I see the ears, I see the trunk, I see the legs, I see a tail. Oh my gosh, son, that's the best elephant I've ever seen. Look at that. Oh, it's amazing. And so that's really what our job is as a originator, is to paint a picture for the underwriter. Yes, there's black and white. There's things that are definitely, your pay stub is your pay stub. There are things that are definitely black and white, but there's also an art to it. There's the science and then there's the art. And a great loan officer, especially with VA, can paint that picture for the underwriter to give them everything they need in order to make a decision in favor of the veteran.
That is a great analogy. I love that.
And here's the other thing. So as a lender, what a VA loan is at the basis of what a VA loan is the VA is guaranteeing 25% of the loan amount to the lender. Okay, so if I loan $400,000 on a mortgage, the VA is saying, hey, that first 100,000, that's on us. So if that borrower does foreclose on the loan, I only have to sell it for that house. If we foreclose on it, we only have to sell it for $300,000 in order to break even, because that $100,000 we lost, the VA is actually going to make us whole with it. So that makes this zero down payment loan, it actually makes it a pretty safe loan for us. And you see here, we love VA loans. And why? Because they default at a much lower rate. Why is that? I mean, the debt to income ratio might be a little bit higher. We have expanded guidelines because it's a safer loan for us. So we can go to a higher debt to income ratio, but they default less. Why is that? I would venture to say that it's because veterans in general are more committed, are more, maybe I shouldn't say more honorable, but they're honorable. They're not running away from their commitments. They're not scared of making a commitment and then standing up and upholding that. So I would say that's why the default rate is significantly lower. What do you think, Jay?
I think you're right, and they're disciplined by nature, right? Which kind of goes into your point of, hey, this is our budget. This is how we're going to budget. Heck, if they're active duty, they actually get a housing stipend, right? And so they can create a budget around what their payment needs to be and just have that inherent discipline to make sure that they're going to make their mortgage payment. Now, does crap happen? Of course, right? But like you said, if you look at the data, they have the best portfolio performance as far as default rates.
Yep, and then the other thing is VA loans close at a higher rate than conventional loans and close at a higher rate than FHA loans. So just on the surface, what's the best for your seller if you're a realtor? The loan that's going to close is probably the best, right? Or it should be way up on your list anyway. And so VA loans perform better from a lender standpoint, and they perform better from a closing standpoint. So myth number 3,
All
they
right.
take forever, Jay. These VA loans take forever. Is that true?
No, it's not. And we literally made an offer last week, and the listing agent called me. He's like, hey, do I need to write up a 60-day contract? I'm like, no, you don't. All right. So for those that don't know, what this means is the vast majority, 99% of VA loans, we have automatic underwriting authority. So that's a common misconception, is that the VA is actually lending the money. The VA is actually underwriting the loans. No, as Patton just said, they are guaranteeing 25% of it. The individual lender, we are underwriting and giving the money for it. All right, so that's the truth. And these numbers are actually gotten a little bit better. So these came directly from the VA Lenders Conference in May earlier this year. If you look at the average days to close, the VA loan is leading the pack, 32.9. Now, these are national averages. All right, conventional was the slowest. They were at 43 days. But don't let anybody tell you that a VA loan takes longer. All right, and here's our stats. This is a UMortgage internal. We're averaging about 26 days right now on our VA contracts.
And just keep in mind when you're looking at turn times, like 26 days turn time, that doesn't, better than 30 is good, right? Most loans come in with a 30-day turn time, but just because it's 26, we've got loans. I had one close last week that closed in about 2 weeks. And by the way, that was a full condo approval through the VA and full appraisal, like the whole thing. And we closed that in just a hair over 2 weeks. So you can be super fast on VA loans, and there shouldn't be anything from a speed standpoint that keeps you from accepting that offer. Let me throw this out there. Go ahead, Jay.
I thought of something. I'm going to cut you off. I got to, something in my head. I got to get it out. While we're talking about turn times, realtors, don't let any lender fool you and say, hey, I know the VA appraisers. I know we're going to get Joe Bob assigned. No lender in America controls the VA appraisal process. We all submit the appraisal request through the VA. They assign the appraiser, and every state and every county has established turn times on how long it takes on the appraisal. So don't let anybody misguide you and say, hey, I can guarantee you we get a 5-day appraisal. That's just clearly not true.
And they don't accept rushes either. You can't ask the VA to rush the appraisal and have them do it any faster than what the standard process is. Now, let me throw out one more thing from a all these myths, right? They came from somewhere. They came from, and here's my opinion on where all these myths came from. Is 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we already talked about that the VA has delegated authority down to the lenders in 99% of cases. There are only a very, very small percentage of cases where the loan actually has to go to the VA to get approval before closing. And so what happens, what has happened in my opinion is that there are originators out there. By the way, I saw this stat a couple days ago. 88% of originators in the United States originate fewer than 3 VA loans in a year. Okay, so those guys probably aren't, 88% of loan originators aren't very good at VA loans. And so what happens is that originator will originate a loan, will not know some of the nuance behind, how to calculate, for instance, residual income, and we could have a whole class about residual income in itself, but they don't know how to calculate that. But it gets to the underwriter, and guess what? The underwriter knows the guidelines, and the underwriter knows how to underwrite that VA loan and knows how to calculate residual income. So the underwriter looks at it and says, nope, denied. And it gets kicked back to the originator. The originator has a choice at this point. The originator has to call the realtors, has to call the borrower and say, your loan is denied. But here's what they've done. Instead of taking personal responsibility for the mistake that was made, what they did was they would call up and they'd say, you know what? The VA denied your loan and I'm so sorry. And everybody believes it. Everybody would believe that, you know what? The VA is this massive bureaucracy that doesn't make any sense and just, operates, they march to their own drum. And that's why this loan got denied, is because of this bureaucratic nonsense. The VA is terrible. VA loans must suck. It was really the originator probably. And so that's where this all got turned around. But the reality is that the VA never looks at a loan. In 99% of cases, they never even see that loan until that loan is closed, funded, and that borrower is living in the house. So don't let these myths that came up. I mean, that's where they came from, in my opinion, but they're just not true.
Well, I hear this all the time. We're not accepting an offer because my sellers are not paying the veterans' VA fees.
Jay, that's just silly. So there is, if you Google VA non-allowables, it's totally a thing. There's a whole list of things that you're not allowed to charge, only if there's a 1% origination fee being charged by the lender. So when there's a 1% origination fee, that's when the non-allowable fees kick in. I really don't know. There aren't very many lenders out there that are charging just a straight 1% origination fee, although there are some. We do not, and so as far as non-allowable fees, we wouldn't fall into any of those. And this says pest inspection fee real quick. Pest inspection fee, as of about 1.5 years ago, it used to be that the borrower is the only person that could pay, or that the borrower could not pay for that. Now anybody can pay for the pest inspection. So don't fall into that as well.
Next. Good point. And I wanted to highlight this because we don't see it all the time, Patton. We occasionally see it. It's usually in a form of a transaction fee or something, $495, $500, something like that. But guys and girls, this is directly from Chapter 8 in the 26.7 that a veteran cannot pay any realtor commissions or fees. You simply cannot charge anything. I hear it. I understand. I'm not trying to tell you how to run your business, but they're like, well, they agreed to it. They agreed to pay my $300 transaction fee. I'm sorry, you cannot charge a veteran any fees. Now, to that point, where we've all been heard or seen the news of the lawsuits and the jury and the court stuff that's going on with realtor commissions. Nobody has a crystal ball like going forward, but this obviously would have an impact on VA loans and veterans buying if all of a sudden buyers were to have to pay for realtor buyer commission. So just, I've gotten this question, Pat, I'm sure you've gotten this question a few times. Nobody knows the answer, but I truly believe that the VA is paying attention, and if they have to make an actual change, they will.
Yeah, the VA loan, the VA is actually pretty good about, I mean, they're not going to, I don't think they're going to disadvantage the veteran. So my opinion is that if it came down to, borrowers had to pay it, I think the VA would actually figure out a way, kind of like the VA funding fee, to potentially guarantee loans that financed that portion of it. I think that would be not out of the realm of possibility.
Yep.
All right, so here's something that people I don't think have a very good understanding of as well is what are the rules for seller concessions? And first of all, there's a difference. The VA is the only loan type that really makes a distinction between what is a closing cost and what is a seller concession. So the VA defines a seller concession of anything of value to the borrower. That could be the pool table that nobody wanted to take apart and just wanted to leave in the rec room, right? That could be a seller concession. It could be just cash to do whatever. But the seller concession for a VA loan can be up to 4% of the purchase price. Okay. Now, if I'm a realtor, here's how I write a contract. Is I need to understand that, number one, let's say your closing costs are going to be $10,000, and you want to get an extra $10,000 of seller concessions, and that I can use as an originator. I can actually use that to pay down debt. I can use that to buy down the rate. I can do all sorts of things with that money. But I would write it as this: instead of trying to split it up between 10,000 in closing costs and 10,000 in seller concessions, what I would do is I would write the contract as $20,000 in closing costs and or seller concessions. That way, if the closing costs are only $8,000, I have that extra, that 2,000 can shift from closing costs into the seller concessions, as long as I meet the 4% seller concession rule. Hopefully that made sense. But one of the key things there on that last slide was that I can use seller concessions to pay off debt in order to help qualify. So there are occasions where this doesn't work. This loan doesn't work unless we pay off a car and get rid of that $400 payment. But let's say they only owe $6,000 on a car. Maybe it's a lot easier to pay off that car and get rid of that $400 payment than it is to play with the interest rate and do all this other stuff to make the loan qualify. All right, I think I pretty much talked about this. So there's difference between closing costs and seller concessions. And so don't get those confused in your mind.
Let's throw a little math at them. No calculators, So we're going to pretend we have a $400,000 purchase and we're getting $20,000 in seller contributions, seller concessions. Now, I can see Patton over there doing the math in his head. He's like, wait a minute, $20,000 in a $400,000 contract, that's 5% seller concessions, bro. You can't do that. Yeah, you can, because Patton just explained it. 4% can go to seller concessions plus customary closing costs. So looking at this example, let's pretend the closing costs were $9,000 and we have a borrower who has $11,000 left on their Ford F-150 truck loan that they're paying $800 a month for, and they're not going to qualify. Guess what? We can pay off that truck loan, lower that debt to income ratio, save the deal, and have the veteran bring zero cash to close, all with seller concessions. Think about how freaking powerful that is that you can get a veteran into a home. They otherwise were not going to qualify. The payment still fits their budget. They can make it. They're comfortable with it, and they can bring zero cash to close. There is no other mortgage product in the universe that is this strong, and these veterans earn the right to use it.
Yeah, and I'll add something to that. I absolutely 100% agree with you, obviously, Jay, that the VA loan is the most powerful product in the hands of somebody who knows how to use it, who knows all the little rules, who knows the ways that you can adjust things and massage things to make it work. It's far more flexible than any other loan product. And it's not even close. It's not even close, the flexibility that the VA gives me compared to everything else. Let me give you an example. Let's say, we talked about a veteran maybe bringing a 5% down payment in order to lower his funding fee, okay? So on a $400,000 house, they were gonna put down $20,000 as a down payment, okay? But now, what happens if the appraisal comes in low? For whatever reason, it just came in low, and it came in at 380. The beautiful thing about the VA loan is I probably have the option instead of the veteran going, oh man, I'm out. I don't, they were already planning on putting a 5% down payment down. They can just do the loan for 380. That 5% can actually go to the appraisal gap if it had to. Now, contrast that with somebody that's doing a conventional loan. All they've got is their 5% and closing costs. And all of a sudden the appraisal comes in low, the seller doesn't want to budge. Well, guess what? They have to bring 5% of 380 plus the 20,000. So now that's almost an extra $20,000 that they would have to bring to closing, and that deal just fell apart. Where with the VA, I can adjust, I can, so just that's just an example of one of the flexibility points of a VA that I think people don't think about.
Yeah, and we're about to talk about what happens with low appraisals too.
Yeah, what happened? Appraisals, I mean, they're so hard with VA, Jay. I don't even want to hear it anymore.
This is probably the most popular myth that I hear is that appraisals are so much harder. The VA appraisers are just out to screw you. So let's look at it. All right, let's talk about it. For those that don't know, I personally believe the VA appraisal is the best one out there. Why? Because it gives you two chances. There's no other mortgage product out there that if appraisal is going to come in low, it gives you two chances to fight it. The first one, as you see on the slide, is called Tidewater. Tidewater notification is the appraiser saying, hey Jay, hey Patton, the appraised value is going to come in low. It's going to come in lower than the purchase price. Now, we don't know as the loan originator. A lot of times the realtors ask me at this point in the process, hey man, are we 5,000 short? Are we 10,000 short? We don't know. We could be $1 short. If for all it means, like, I don't know how much it's going to be short, but it's going to come in lower than purchase price. And here's our chance. Here's our chance to give them the best 3 comps that we feel support the purchase price so the appraiser can review them. Maybe they missed it, right? And so this is what we do with Tidewater. This is before we receive the appraisal report. Let's pretend we get the appraisal report. It's still low. And we're confident. We're like, man, this appraiser, they use comps that are 3 neighborhoods over. We got comps that are right here in the neighborhood. They totally jacked this up. We can do a reconsideration of value, an ROV, you'll hear us call it. And for the lack of better terms, this is basically an appeal. We're appealing directly to the VA. We're going around the appraiser and saying, hey, the appraiser got it wrong. Here's the reasons why. And it's astounding. Right now, the latest statistic, Pat, and I heard is 60% of ROVs are at least getting some sort of increase in value. It may not go all the way up to the purchase price, but it's getting some increase in value. So you better be working with a loan officer that knows how to do this process.
Well, the other thing is oftentimes the Tidewater, I see probably, I don't know, 50% of those that they declare Tidewater, they get comps from the realtors, and then they come and they go, oh yeah, it's a value, don't worry about it. So it never even gets to the reconsideration. So VA loans are the only loan product that you actually have the opportunity, and they're actually asking you to influence the appraiser. Like legit, the appraiser is saying, please influence me. Like we all know we can't do that, right? Well, you can. That's what the Tidewater process is for.
Yep. So with an appraisal, just like any other appraisal, there's minimum property requirements. And at the end of the day, an appraiser is just making sure it's safe, sound, and sanitary. Okay, so what does that look like? So here's some examples of just common NPRs, right? On an older home, if a home is built before 1978, we have to assume that it's lead-based paint. Okay, so that's one minimum property requirement. If there's chipped paint, you're going to get dinged for it. The roof, they want to make sure, they don't really care the age of the roof. There actually is really no requirement. They just want to make sure that it's safe and sound. Heating, the same way. A common misconception is that a house has to have air conditioning. Now here, most places in America, you're going to have it, especially here in the South. But the VA doesn't actually dictate that you have to have cooling. They just say you have to have heating and you have to keep the house at 50 degrees or higher. And if you're on a well, if you're out in the country, if you have a private well, you have to meet the local EPA standards. So the VA doesn't actually tell you, hey, it has to be this requirement. It just says whatever the local authority is, you have to meet that for safe drinking water. All right, these are just very basic minimum property requirements that most homes are going to have already.
And I'll throw in something about the well water test. I've actually heard this story from a borrower, and they purchased a house and it was on a well. It was somewhere in California, and they bought it on a conventional loan, and they lived there for a while. And over the course of the next 3-4 years, their family had all sorts of health issues, and his wife was sick, and the kids were sick, and there was, you talk about, well, there's power lines or whatever it is, right? All these different things. Well, then they did a refinance. They want to do a cash out refinance, and we got the opportunity to do a VA loan with them. And obviously, well, they're on a well water. And so we had the well water test, and the levels of like arsenic and all sorts of other just poisons in their water were so high, and they're like, holy cow, if only we'd done a VA loan in the first place, we could have avoided years of sickness and all these issues we've had in our family. So the well water test, I mean, that's literally the VA actually protecting the veteran above and beyond what any other type of loan would do. So it's not a bad thing. And then to add to this, people often lump in septic inspections. A septic tank does not need its own inspection unless the appraiser calls it out and says, hey, I think there's issues. There may be problems with the septic system. Then you may have to get a septic inspection, but it's not a mandatory thing like potentially a termite or a well water.
It's a good point. And so on this slide, just you see this all the time, that they're worried, oh, that the house is outdated. It's from the 60s and they haven't updated. They got the popcorn ceilings and all that stuff. Like, these are not NPRs. Maybe the yard work is trash and it looks horrible. The appraiser doesn't care unless there's a safety issue, unless there's a big 6-foot freaking hole in the yard, and that's going to be a safety issue. But if it's just yard work, if it needs updating, if it's cosmetically ugly, that is not going to get called out on an appraisal.
Now here's some things that you probably should pay a little bit of attention to. I mean, these are the big ones, right? Peeling paint. They're always gonna, if you see something like that on the exterior of your house or the interior or on the windowsills and things like that, that's going to need to be scraped and repainted. If you see that the door frame there is all I don't know if that's wood rot or if there's been little rats chewing on it, but that's a problem. It's going to need to be fixed. And then stairways without a handrail, there's going to be a handrail on that. That's a safety issue. But here's something I see this on you go on Zillow or whatever, MLS, and you start looking at houses. You see stuff where the listing agent says, conventional loan only, FHA loan only, no VA, stuff like that. And the reason is because they know that there are issues like this. I will tell you that in the hands of a good VA loan originator, you can do these, and it's called a renovation loan. So VA renovation loans exist. So the way a renovation loan would work is, let's say the whole house is falling apart like this one on the bottom left. Essentially, let's say you get the property under contract for $300,000, and the borrower wants to do a bunch of painting and upgrading, and there's stuff to fix. There's holes in the walls. There's this, that, and the other thing. They get a contractor quote. Let's say the contractor quote is for $75,000. So now you have a $300,000 purchase contract and a $75,000 contract bid, and you put those together, and we send those to the appraiser, and we tell the appraiser, hey, appraise this property as if all this stuff has already been fixed. Here's the bid for it. And the appraiser looks at it and says, yeah, you know what, when you redo the kitchen and the bathrooms and paint and fix this door frame and do the scraping of the paint and do all this stuff, yes, that house will appraise for 375 or 400,000. Now we lend right at the beginning. We close at 375 with none of the work being done. And the seller gets their 300, we keep the 75, and we start paying it to the contractor to get that work done. That's a VA renovation loan. It's one of the best products out there. Nobody knows anything about it, or very few people know anything about it, and even fewer actually do it. So don't be scared of houses. We can do just about anything.
Love it. That is great. And so also, if you have something that doesn't meet a minimum property requirement, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have it remedied, all right? So you can apply for a waiver. You can say, hey, I don't really care about the shed that has no value, that's out in the backyard, that has the chip paint. I don't care. I want that waived, and you can request it in writing and get it approved. All right, so it can't fall into the safe sanitary sound. So if it was, chipped paint in a tiny, tiny corner of a house, and you're like, dude, I don't care about it, but if the home was built before 1978, then we have to assume lead-based paint. We still have to remedy that. But if it is a 2019 house, you can apply for the waiver. It can't be the entire southern wall of a house. We're going to have to fix that. But if it's just a small little part, you can apply for a waiver. All right. So a lot of people don't realize that you can do NPR waivers with VA loans.
And then, we've talked about a lot of these things already, but some of the benefits of a VA loan, if you're a borrower, 100% financing, that's a great thing. I would rather leave my cash deployed somewhere else and do 100% financing than bring a big down payment. Gift funds, absolutely allowed. And then the next couple are, it's all about flexible underwriting, and it's all about the VA is guaranteeing a big chunk of money to the bank. And so that gives us flexibility. We can go to a lower interest rate, or there's a lower interest rate because the interest rate's about risk. We can go to a lower FICO. Here's one at the bottom, energy efficient improvements. They can be actually added to any VA loan. So one of the things I used to do all the time when there were interest rate reduction loan refinances is, what can I do that's cheap that will actually save a borrower money? Well, heck, go out and get a quote for spray foam insulation on your 1972 built house that's probably got lousy insulation. So for $1,500, they go get a spray foam job. They go in the attic and put another 8 inches of foam up there, and that's going to save them a ton of money. But $1,500 added to the mortgage is only going to cost them $10 a month. Like that probably probably a good thing to do. So you can add those energy efficient improvements to any VA mortgage. Let's talk real quick about assumable. So VA assumable loans, it's a big, if you go on any Facebook page or any of that with realtors, there's a ton of talk around it. Typically, there's not really a loan. There may be, hit or miss. It's like finding hen's teeth out there. But there's really not a loan to meet that gap between what the current loan amount is and what the offer price is, or the list price is. So if it's a $400,000 purchase price, but they bought it for $250 and now they owe $225, the buyer that's going to try to assume that $225 at 2.25% has to come in with a $175,000 difference. There's really no way around that. So just make sure and the other thing is that assumable VA loan assumptions do not go through an originator like me or like Jay. We can give you some advice. We can talk to you about it, but the assumption itself actually goes through whoever holds the current mortgage for that property. So we're pretty much useless when it comes to that. The other stuff on here, pretty simple stuff. There is one
couple things I want to add on this slide. Sorry to cut you off, Patton. Like another common misconception about the VA loan is like, oh, I used it 10 years ago and I can't use it again, or I have it on a current property back in California that I no longer live there, so I got to go conventional. That is absolutely false. At the end of the day, the entitlement, how much entitlement you have remaining, dictates how many VA loans you can have. I have some veterans that have 3 VA loans out. Each time they PCS, they bought you know, a $200,000 kind of investment property type of home. They lived in it for 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, whatever it was, and then moved on and created it into an investment property. So you can have multiple VA loans. Don't let anybody tell you you can't have more than one. And then another thing, it's not on this slide, but I want to talk about is condos. You can absolutely buy a condo with a VA loan. The condo association has to go through the approval process with the VA. There's certain things that they want to look at, certain stipulations as far as owner occupancy, the percent that is residential versus commercial. There's a few things they're looking for. This is a big, big deal. If the VA comes back to Patton and says, hey, Patton, we're denying this condo association, and he has a buyer that's willing to waive it and submit it into the VA. Now, this is not guaranteed, right? But you at least have this option. You can go to the VA and say, hey, I understand that this condo association was denied for XYZ reasons. I do not care. I still want to purchase this as my primary home, and I understand the liability that I'm assuming by doing this. The VA will grant that waiver, or has the ability to grant that waiver, and allow you to buy a condo that's been denied and still use a VA loan on it. Not a lot of people know about that, about the benefit of a VA loan.
And then so the last thing on that slide was seller concessions, and there's actually a question here from Samantha on seller concession scenario. So a VA loan is not limited to only a 4% contribution from the seller. It is limited to 4% for seller concessions, plus you could have whatever the closing costs are. So let's say the closing costs were 4% by themselves. You could have theoretically 4% of seller or of closing costs being paid for by the seller. You could also have another 4% being paid for by the seller for seller concessions. So add those together and you're actually getting 8% from the seller. So totally possible to do that. You could have, I mean, you could legit have 8%, 9%. So whatever the closing costs are customary. Oh, by the way, you can actually have some points being paid in there as well. That's legal also. So you could, I mean, whatever you can get from the seller, absolutely go get it. And 9 times out of 10, there's something I can spend that 4% concession on. And if they have no debt whatsoever, then I mean, I've had customers go out and buy, they're going to want a new washer and dryer and a new fridge. Go out and put that on a credit card, send the bill in, and we'll use the seller concessions to pay that bill off. So there's things you can do with seller concessions that are super cool and flexible for a VA loan.
Yeah.
Brian
Phillips, I think one of our deals that we just got, and we had 6% in seller concessions. We used 2% for discount points because that's custom to the current market conditions, and then we use the other 4% for true seller concessions. You just got to know how to work it.
Yep. And Brian, you asked what percentage of assumptions applied for go through. I don't have any idea. I will tell you this though, they're pretty long and pretty painful generally. And I would say the reason for that is because there's absolutely no money to be made in it for anybody. And I don't know, if I'm a business owner and I have one part of my business that maybe makes $0, you're probably not putting the sharpest and brightest people in that section. I don't know.
I want to expand on that, on the assumptions, since they're kind of popular right now. The listing agents that are on this, if y'all are advertising, hey, this is a VA assumable loan, you are correct. Anybody can assume that loan. They do not have to be a veteran. I want to make sure y'all understood that. You do not have to be a veteran in order to assume a VA loan. However, if I'm a veteran and Joe Schmo is assuming my loan who has no entitlement to substitute for me, and I'm going to go try to buy another home using my VA entitlement, my entitlement is still tied to my old house. You would have to be crazy. No offense to the people that do this, but to let a non-veteran assume your loan and still have your entitlement charged to that loan, there's not a lot of incentive to do that.
Zero incentive. All right, what kind of other questions do we have? If you have questions, jump in the question section and feel free to hit us up. Any questions at all?
I do see a comment about the pest inspection being allowed in Texas. You're correct. Patton even said it. Pest inspections are actually allowed in all 50 states now to be paid by the buyers. That they are no longer required to be paid by the sellers.
Ayana, type in that question. I cannot read anybody's mind. Oh, who's the Army? That's not this weekend. It's next weekend. And Army is going to crush Navy. You just watch that. Minimum property requirements, that's actually in VA PAM 26-7. You could pretty quickly Google VA MPRs, and you're going to come up with a pretty good list of it. Yeah, Brian, that's
we're getting a lot of questions.
That's a good point. The quality of VA buyers. The veterans may have a security clearance just for their job, and you know, your financial security is actually a big part of that. And if you're a government contractor, or if you're active duty and in a job where you have to have a top secret or whatever clearance, yeah, if you defaulted on a home loan, that could be grounds for you losing your clearance, and now you don't have a job too. So that would not be good. Christy, what is my response to realtors who say VA appraisals come in low? Go to my Facebook page, and I think 3 of my last 4 appraisals have come in high. And really, here's what I actually say to a realtor that says that is that the reality is that, you know, real estate is local, right? If that house is priced appropriately and the comps are good, it's going to appraise. The VA appraiser isn't somebody that works for the VA. You know, they're independent contractor. They're just an appraiser. They may do 2 VA appraisals today, and tomorrow they may go out and do 2 conventional appraisals, and the next day go do a couple FHA appraisals. They're going to use the same methodology really for all of them. Yeah, there's some, you know, the MPRs may be a little bit different based on the type of loan, but the methodology where they come up with actually the value is going to be is pretty much the same. They go find comps within a certain radius of of that property. And so I just don't think that the same appraiser would have given the same number whether it was a VA loan or whether it was a conventional or an FHA. So I think it's more about the appraiser than it is the type of loan.
Yeah, and to your point, Patton, when they ask me that, I say, well, are you worried that it's not going to make value? And a lot of times they were like, well, yeah, actually we priced this pretty aggressively and we don't think it's going to make value no matter the loan amount. And so then I talked to them, well, you know, we have the 2 chances to fight it with Tidewater and the ROV process. But a lot of times it's easy to point the finger at the VA. Oh, the VA is the reason why the value came in low. Well, you know, if you priced it way high from the get-go, like there's no loan appraisal that's going to make value. So
sure. And a couple other questions here. So as you pay off your loan, does your entitlement build back up? No. It's all where the loan started. As you pay off, when it's paid off completely, yes, you get that entitlement back, but it does not build back up slowly over time. It is not recommended. So if you were a non-veteran and you could assume a loan, like heck yeah, go assume it. If the person getting out of the house, the seller, if they're willing to let a non-veteran assume a loan, like there'd be nothing wrong with a non-veteran assuming it from the non-veteran's point of view. But I'm just saying, if you're a selling agent, do not let your seller let a non-veteran assume that loan, because the veteran's entitlement sticks with that house. And if the non-veteran ever foreclosed on it, the veteran actually loses their entitlement and would never be able to use a VA loan again, potentially. So that's why I say, that's why we say don't let a non-veteran assume the loan. ROVs, yeah, you can do a reconsideration of value on any type of loan, but the VA loan is the only one that gives you the Tidewater up front, where you can actually
yeah. So to your point, Samantha asked if, can we do an ROV on all loan types? Yes, you technically can. Here's why the VA reconsideration of value is superior, because on conventional and other reconsideration of values, you're appealing directly to the appraiser. The person that gave you the low value, you're trying to convince them that they're actually wrong and to raise their value. With the VA, you're bypassing the appraiser and you're going directly to the VA review board, if you want to call it that, and they're basically doing a full-on appraisal process themselves, a second appraisal almost. You can call it. It's not technically a second appraisal, but that's basically what they're looking at. So the VA reconsideration of value is much stronger, in my opinion, than the other loan types.
And Brian had a good point here, that with other types of loans, you're essentially trying to convince the appraiser that he or she screwed up, that they made a mistake. And I mean, we know that people don't like to admit they made a mistake, right? But with the VA process, it's going past the appraiser and actually going to the VA itself. And so you don't have to convince anybody that they made a mistake. You just got to convince their boss that they made a mistake, and that's a little bit easier. Christine, you had a question. Conventional loan limits for the county. Those all came out today. So the new conventional loan limit for most counties is 766,550 for the coming year, and that's true. If I am a VA buyer and I don't have any entitlement being used currently, meaning I don't have a current VA loan out there, I've never lost any entitlement due to a foreclosure or short sale or anything like that. There is the loan limit doesn't matter. I can go buy a $3 million house with no down payment. The VA will guarantee it. The only time the loan limit comes into play for VA loans now is when you have some sort of impact on your current entitlement, meaning you bought a house for $200,000 5 years ago. Well, you have 200,000 of your entitlement used up now. And in theory now, when the limit is 766, 766 minus 200 is 566. You could go buy another house for 566 with no down payment. When you go above the 566, what happens is you have to put down a 25% down payment only on that part that's above 566. So if you were going to 666, well, let's not do, we don't want to buy a house for 666. 700, you would have 25% of the difference between 700 and 566. So that's 134,000. That would be, $34,000 roughly of down payment. Turn time for a veteran to get a new loan once somebody buys and pays off their existing loan. You could do that same day. The restoration of entitlement is the same day process, or can be, so you don't really have to worry about that. Aaron, that's a good question. How can you contact me? Or Jay? My email is pgade@umortgage.com. Jay's is jbunte@umortgage.com. And or just look us up. We're all over social media, and you can find us. Happy to chat with them. Residual and not DTI. Brian, you're gonna make it get complicated here. So real quick, one of the things about the VA loan that's different than a conventional loan or FHA loan is the difference between the VA doesn't really have a limit on debt to income ratio. Conventional loans are limited to about 50%, FHA somewhere in 55-ish%. VA loans, I've seen approvals at 65, 70%. What matters to the VA is that based on your family size and that you have X amount of dollars left over at the end of every month after all your debts are paid. So if you make $5,000 a month and you have 8 kids, they're going to make sure you have enough money for food and, basic household stuff for your 8 kids. You're going to qualify for actually more house if you make $5,000 a month and you have 0 kids. So if you're single, you're going to have more. You're going to be able to go to a higher purchase price with the same income and the same other debts compared to somebody that's got a bunch of kids. Also, there's a calculation in there for the square footage of the house. So the VA makes us calculate 14 cents per square foot. So theoretically, I could tell you, hey, you qualify for a $300,000 house, and you go out shopping and you find a $300,000 house that's 1,800 square feet. The realtor, being helpful and wanting to, they know they've got those 8 kids, they go, wait a minute, there's a house down the street that's 4,000 square feet and it's $300,000. Let's go put in an offer on that. because of the square footage difference, you could theoretically run into a problem where you qualify for this $300,000 house down the street from the much bigger $300,000 house. You qualify for the little house, you don't qualify for the big house because of the way that the VA calculates residual income. So that's just touching on it. If you want to know more about it, call me. I am happy to talk about VA loans pretty much 24/7. I'm one of the few people in the world that dreams about VA loans, probably. Maybe Jay does probably too, but anyway.
Occasionally.
What other questions anybody have? I think we're coming up on our hour. Hopefully you guys got a lot out of this. Jay, thank you so much. You did awesome. Appreciate you partnering up with me on this and just being an awesome advocate for our veterans. And I appreciate you guys.
Yep.